All right. So, someone posted in the comments something about they didn't feel like there had been a identification with at the experiential level, that which I'm always pointing to, which is not a thing. I can't really remember how it was phrased, but I know what was meant by the comment. So I thought I would talk about identity, because you often hear this described as a shift in identity or a disidentification from me or self. Similar to the last video I posted, this isn't something that is really like an identity in the way that the mind would think about it and the way that the mind would frame it. I would maybe describe it as a noticing of what has always been primary, what has always been the essence of identity, of experience, of the experience of the person that comes before the personal identity. That's just here in the absence of the story about me or this individual life that plays out along a relative timeline. With this, what I call recognition, it's not something that you can take a position on to confirm from a position, because what I'm pointing to is all positions, and that me that would take a position relate to something to confirm it, to confirm something like a re-identification, is made from it, would have to separate itself into two things, separate itself into a subject or an objective me, an objective reality called me, an objective reality called awareness, an objective thing called non-dual. It doesn't work like that. It's essentially what's present prior to time, what's present prior to the character, prior to the ability to relate to something in a conceptual way, prior to the ability to take a position to confirm, or take a position to doubt. So that which takes a position that doubts and says, I've not had an identification with this thing, and that there's the suggestion, the idea that there is a thing to identify with from a position, if that makes sense. In that there is the suggestion or the reification of the me that's going to get something, or the me that exists in time that doesn't have something yet. And that story appears now as a single suggestion or assumption, a single thought. So for example, if I'm going to take a position on something, if I'm going to say, I don't feel like I've had an awakening yet, that assumes me, in whatever form that thought can appear. It might not be as overt and language based as that. It might even be quite subtle to the extent that it feels like a feeling or something like that, rather than an overt thought narrative. But if this feeling or the narrative or thought, because initially it might not be clear what a thought is and what a thought isn't, if there's this assumption, let's call it an assumption, because an assumption doesn't have as much of an overt form. This assumption that says or suggests, I don't feel like I've had an awakening yet, that implies the existence of a me, implies the existence of an event, a tangible event that happens in time called awakening. It implies the existence of time. There is a time now that I'm not awake, and there will be a time in the future where I'm either awake or not awake. So do you see how this is functioning in thought? Or do you feel how this is functioning in thought? As soon as we take a position on something, we're already a step ahead of the assumption. I'm not sure how much of the people in the comments, I'm not sure how much of this is mistranslated via the limitations of the language, because language exists as a subject-object duality, as a way of describing something to someone else with objective qualities. I'm not sure how much of this is mistranslated in comments, because obviously I can't know whoever's watching this your experience. After a certain point you can't know your own experience, but when it's phrased in this way, I just assume that this assumption has been made. The assumption has been made that says, I am a me that relates to this reality separate from me. With this, you hear people talk about a shift in identity. Again, these models of language are flawed, but it's an identity that is always present and doesn't need to be discovered by the individual. In a way, it can't be discovered by the individual, because the individual is made of it. The individual is looking from it. The individual is born from it into time. Every time there's an identified thought, and a thought with some belief and identification suggested in it, a thought with a me suggested in it. Every time that thought appears now, the me is born into time and then starts looking for itself. But when it starts looking for itself in that way, it's always one step past the assumption. It's already looked past what I'm pointing to. That which is revealed to be the primary identity, let's say, which you can't really call it an identity, because identity suggests that this identity has characteristics which define it, separate from the entirety of reality. And that's not what we're talking about in terms of non-duality. This has no qualities because it has every quality. It doesn't need to have an identity because it's not separate from anything. All identities are born from it. Anything that feels like an identity, that feels like me, is born from this. It emerges from it, born as something separate from it, but is made of the same substance, so to speak. So You don't need to worry about being able to confirm this. Like I've said many times, when I talk it and someone hears this who hears it from the subjective position of the individual, will hear me talking about or suggested that this person here that you see is someone who had an awakening that is an event in time and then now is an awake person. It's just not like that. It's not like that. In that theme, in that story, there's no such thing as awakening, and it will just keep chasing itself as a story. The awakening almost never happens, or it doesn't happen in time. It doesn't happen for the person. And no matter how many times you hear that, the function, the process of the individual will continue to run in the same way until you, like I said in the previous video, get underneath it, until that stops enough for this, which is the fundamental essence of all identities, until that stops enough for this to come through with clarity. But it doesn't come through for someone to confirm it by taking a position on it and saying, yes, this is awakeness. It's before all those thoughts, it's before all that identity. So describing it as a re-identification with presence or awareness or whatever, it isn't a good way of describing it. I can't remember if I've ever described it that way, but I wouldn't describe it that way now. That was maybe when, like I explained before, if anyone, I've said this multiple times, if anyone watches my earlier videos, I was attached to this part of this individual was attached to the experience. It was confusing experience with what I'm pointing to now. This is the essence of all experience. This is paradoxically the essence of the self, the individual self. The essence of the separate identity is made from it. Is it? It's the same thing as not two. So there's not a duality and then a non-duality. There's only non-duality. Paradox. There's not a self and then a no self. There's only non-duality. There's only what is not a self appearing as, it's seemingly the appearance or the illusion of a self. What is not separate appearing seemingly as the illusion of separate things. So it's helpful to ask yourself, it was for me at a point, what is being suggested as separate here? Am I resisting something? Or am I chasing something? What is it that's not two? What is it that's not separate? Am I focusing too much on one object of attention or thought? And if you find yourself doing that in whatever form, say for example, looking for an awakening time, you just relax that, let it go and come back to this. Those that have been following this channel for a while will know I frequently say that you're already awakeness. There's no such thing as an awakening that happens to the person. There is a change that happens relatively, you could say, in a timeline of the story of the individual. But that's not the point of this. That's not the what I'm pointing to. That's not an objective. That this can't be used to meet objectives. This awakening can't be used by the individual. It is the individual. The individual is made of it. And it doesn't have to happen like you often hear described, I might be guilty of this as well, you often hear described these wonderful experiences of awakening and profound, with all the experiential, let's say, side effects that come along. These are profound awakening experiences, and people will describe, if you listen to enough of this, you'll notice a commonality between them all. But if you listen to too much of the one thing, it's easy to become fixated on, attached to, or identified with that one description. Which is why, if this is the only channel, non-dual channel in Awakening you're watching, then you should probably start watching other ones. Don't know if that's the case for anyone, but or even a different form of a different medium helps rather than language. Language can become tricky very easily for the mind. What was my point again? Yeah, these awakening experiences, these wild experiences, are described in time as an event, but that's a description in language from one individual to another individual. Let's say it can be taken like that, of an event that happened to someone in time. That's not the awakening. That's a story. That's not what's being pointed to. What's being pointed to is in your experience already. It's already here, and you're already awake. You're already awake. You never wake up. You never... What's described as awakening or a cessation is essentially a thinning, let's say a thinning of the illusion of identity and time, to the extent that what is inherent here, this, naturally becomes clear. So that tense energy of seeking, that tense energy of trying to look for something or get something, is a distraction. Releasing the hold on that, letting it go, not following and looking for, but relaxing, noticing and accepting, surrendering to what already is. It's always here. I know we're limited, and I'm limited, and the people I engage with are limited to talking about and describing this through language. There are limitations to that, but there is something else here that can be felt. And like I mentioned in the previous video, it's not in the language. It's not in the understanding of the language. There's a resonance there that can be felt. The further into this we go, the more about that it becomes, and the less about language or descriptions or knowledge. I heard an analogy once, and it was something like you get a thorn stuck in your finger. I don't know, this probably comes from Zen. Most of the things come from Zen. A rose thorn stuck in your finger. So you take another thorn, the thorn meaning the objective mind, and you use that thorn to take the other thorn out your finger, then you throw both the thorns away. That's kind of what it seems like. There's this seemingly real narrative of the person moving into a journey of awakening or whatever. There's a practice, and the further into this we go, the less that's a thing, the less that even makes sense anymore. So after a certain point, it is very useful to just let go of all the talking about it, to let go of all the quest for knowledge, the quest for looking for something else, rather than just noticing what's already here. So many times you hear people say it's staring you in the face. It's right here. It is what you are. You are what you're seeking. In that regard, you don't have to do anything. But again, more paradox here. The character has to make some sort of effort, some sort of change, some sort of journey in a sense, some sort of practice. There has to be some sort of effort there initially to get in touch with this, what I'm pointing to, from the point of view of that character. And then the further into this we go, the less it becomes about practice, the less it becomes about the character, the less it becomes about time and attainment. And that character and the whole journey of that just dissolves into it, and all we're left with is what was already here, which is this, without adding anything to it. Because what makes it seem elusive, what makes it seem complicated is an act of generation of complexities, an act of adding to, and it all comes through thought, it all comes through the mind. You can describe it like this and it'll sound very simple, is that all we need to do is stop doing that. Stop adding to. It may seem like I'm adding to by talking about this, but that's not the point of this. Because after a certain point, that which seems to generate the illusion, thought, the mind, stories, don't affect this anymore. Don't affect awakeness anymore, because it's seen that they never did. It wasn't real in the first place. It never had any power in the first place. Paradoxically enough, that was just an illusion. And the illusion can be there and it can not be there. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. And that's the freedom in this. So it's much more about the relaxing now, immediately, the relaxing of what identity is there, the identity in thought, the relaxing of that, the noticing of that. The noticing of that is enough to relax it. The bringing that into, let's say, attention is enough to dissolve it. And this could happen in one moment, which is what you hear described as the event of awakening. It could be a mind-blowing experience, but it's not about that experience. It doesn't matter. This could happen in little bits over time. Clarity could build and build and build, and then before you know it, before you even have the chance to make reference to it from a position of me and my experience, clarity will be there inherently anyway, and it doesn't even matter whether you refer to it from a position or not. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. So either way, we get to a point where none of that story stuff even matters. There's no weight to it. And then it's just a relaxation. It's just an enjoyment. It's just a peace. A peace that is always inherently here. A love that is already always inherently here. They just seem to be obscured due to the story that always appears now as a thought form or a kind of energetic movement into a subjective position separate from this. So then we can just become immersed in what is, and it's as simple as that. I said it gets more and more simple. So if anyone is taking a position and saying, I don't feel like I've had this or that or whatever, and you hear something that I say, and this isn't a description, what I'm talking about in these videos, of your experience. So I can never describe or tell you your experience for you, of course. Of course. I can describe my experience, but again, that's not what I'm pointing to. What I'm pointing to isn't dependent on the language. So don't use what I'm describing as something that you then go to look for, or anyone else really, that you then go to look for in your own experience to confirm something. Because this awakening thing, it just doesn't happen like that. It doesn't happen like that. It's much more simple than that. There's, you could almost say, when this clarifies, it's much more inescapable than that. It's such a relief to realise that you never had to look for it. You never had to look for an event called awakening, because awakening is this is it. this is awakeness. You are awakeness. It's already here. It's never not here. So what I was describing in the previous videos about identifying thoughts, and then in this stillness, in this aliveness, in this quietness that isn't dependent on what the thoughts are saying about it. When we've identified these thoughts, they dissolve to the extent where there's stillness. There's just stillness, there's just aliveness, there's just awakeness. That's not something that then needs to be identified and referred to or confirmed by a thought. It's just there anyway. And when you notice that it's, let's say you notice, limits of language, when it's clear that awakeness is just this anyway, then you can just relax, and all of that stuff doesn't even make sense anymore. And we can just dissolve more and more deeply into this pure awareness, presence, isness, whatever you'd like to call it. But the descriptions don't matter. When this clarifies, the descriptions don't matter. The whole journey didn't matter. My awakening didn't matter. You might even not be compelled to describe it like I am, or point to it, or talk about it, or transmit it, or whatever you'd like to say, because it confirms itself. It's self-confirming. It's not depending on a character separate from it to talk about it and confirm it, or think about it and confirm it. It's inherently self-confirming. It's inherently self-knowing. It is the knowingness that knows, that the character uses to know. It is the knowingness. It is the awareness that the character uses to refer to things and be aware of things in the objective world. It is that. It's so simple. So if you feel yourself getting caught up in definitions or descriptions about your experience, your journey, and you've tasted this, you've got in touch with the feeling of the quality of the experience of the pure existence, aliveness of what I'm always pointing to. You've tasted that, you know, let's say it knows what it is in you. Your awakeness knows itself in you. Then you just dissolve into that. You just orient yourself towards that. And if there are stickier doubt thoughts that come up, that's basically what I've been describing in this video, that feel like I've not got something, I need to get something, that feel like the way it is, it feels like something is not quite right about reality as I'm experiencing it now, or reality as it is right now. But everything is inescapably inherently this anyway. And the illusion that there is any other way it could be is just a thought, just another thought, or a doubt thought, because doubt is a thought that appears right now. So again, just notice, release, notice, release. It just gets easier and easier. And like I said, it can just creep up on you. It can creep up on you, and then at a certain point, those doubt thoughts just aren't interesting anymore. That story that says I'm a separate thing just not interesting anymore. You just get bored of it, and it can just be engulfed by this pure knowingness that already inherently knows itself without trying. It's too free to be limited by a this experience or that experience. By this is awake, this is not awake. By I feel like this is how it is, this is not how it is for me. It's too free to be limited by that. Anyway, I need to go now. Talk to you next time.